Tsuchinoko. In the dying light of an autumn sun, Kenta wandered deeper into the forest of Aokigahara, the woods famed for their silence, where trees stood so close together, their limbs reached out like gnarled fingers, weaving a canopy so dense that not even the most curious rays of sunlight dared to fall. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and the distant metallic tang of decaying leaves. This forest was a place where even the bravest of men tread lightly, haunted by stories passed from one generation to the next, stories of restless spirits, the faint crackling of footsteps behind you when there was no one, and of course the most frightening legend of all, the Tsuchinoko. Kenta had heard the stories, of course. Tales told by old men in the village with voices laced with fear. The Tsuchinoko was said to be a serpent-like creature, short and thick with a body that resembled a coiled rope, scales as black as night, eyes gleaming like polished obsidian. It was known to have the ability to mimic the sound of human speech, to leap up to 10 feet in a single bound, and to possess venom so potent that it could cause a man's heart to burst with a single bite. The creature's most terrifying feature, however, was not its appearance or its poisonous nature, but the chilling, shrill laugh it made, one that could freeze the blood in a person's veins. Kenta hadn't believed a word of it. He was a pragmatic man, a farmer who had grown up in the village and had spent his life tilling the soil, putting faith only in what he could see and touch. But today, with the sun sinking behind the distant mountains and the forest closing in around him, he was no longer so sure. His reason for venturing this far was simple. He had been searching for a rare herb, one that grew in the heart of Aokigahara. The herb was said to heal any wound, a boon that had become a local legend in its own right. His father, once a strong and healthy man, had been struck with a terrible sickness that none of the village's healers could cure. Kenta had heard whispers that the herb, known as Yomotsu Shima, grew deep within the forest and had been kept a secret by those who had lived here long before his family settled. The stories of the Tsuchinoko had been warnings meant to deter foolish travelers like himself, but Kenta was not one to be swayed by superstition. It was a foolish thought, really, to go searching at this hour. Darkness had a way of creeping in swiftly in the woods, cloaking everything in an unnatural quiet. His heart thudded against his ribs, a warning that he was alone, lost in a labyrinth of shadow. The wind sighed through the trees, whistling with an otherworldly voice that carried whispers that seemed to echo just behind him. Kenta spun, but the only thing that met his eyes was the dense thicket of ancient trunks, their knotted branches reaching out like long, skeletal arms. "Get a hold of yourself," he muttered, clenching his fists to stop the tremble that had begun in his fingers. He turned his gaze back to the narrow path and pressed on, the thorns clawing at his boots and the fallen leaves crunching like bones beneath him. He stumbled upon a clearing where the underbrush was almost impossibly thick, parting just enough to reveal an ancient stone shrine overgrown with moss and lichen. It looked as though no one had touched it in centuries. But what caught Kenta's attention was the carving of a creature on the stone, a creature with the body of a snake, short and wide, and a head that seemed to smirk at him with a twisted, cruel grin. Shivers raced down his spine. This is it, he thought. He was close. He stepped forward, eyes scanning the clearing, but before he could make a move, the forest fell silent. Not a leaf moved, not a bird sang. The world seemed to have stopped breathing. Suddenly, a low, hissing noise curled through the air, followed by a snicker so sharp and chilling that it sent his heart stuttering in his chest. Kenta whipped around, but saw nothing. Only darkness that seemed to press in tighter and tighter. And then it appeared. A shape slithered from the shadows, its body impossibly thick, coiling in on itself like a living knot. Its scales were black with a dull gleam, and its eyes, wide and glistening, held an unnatural intelligence that made Kenta's blood run cold. The creature raised its head and let out a deep, echoing hiss. Kenta's breath caught in his throat, and he stumbled back. The creature followed, its movements fluid and fast, yet it made no sound as it glided. Its body seemed to pulse and shift, the scales moving like liquid as it approached. For a moment, Kenta thought it was going to pass him. But then, with a sudden sharp lurch, it lunged forward, its mouth opening wide, revealing teeth that were jagged and as black as obsidian. Kenta fell, scraping his palms on the rough stone path as he tried to crawl backward, but the creature was fast, too fast. It coiled around his legs like a vice, its skin cold and slick, making him gasp in shock and fear. The serpent's eyes bored into his, and for the briefest moment, he could almost swear that it whispered his name. The woods were filled with that shrill, malevolent laugh again, and Kenta screamed as the creature's fangs pierced his flesh, the venom burning through his veins like fire. Suddenly there was silence. Kenta's vision blurred, and he felt himself slipping into darkness. The last thing he saw before everything went black was the creature's grin, the same twisted smile carved into the shrine, as if it had always been there, waiting for him. When Kenta awoke, it was dawn. The sun peeked over the mountains, bathing the forest in a soft golden light. His head throbbed, and his limbs felt as though they were made of lead. He was lying in the clearing, the stone shrine before him, but the creature was gone. There was no trace of the serpent, no sign that it had ever been there at all. He pushed himself up, searching for the herb, but his vision was still swimming, and then he heard it. The familiar, chilling laugh that sent needles of ice up his spine. This time, it was coming from within him, echoing in his mind as though he were the one making it. He reached for his chest, feeling the hot pulse of his heart, faster and more erratic than it should be. A sudden cold realization washed over him. He was no longer alone. The Tsuchinoko had claimed him, and now, the forest itself would speak with his voice. The last thing Kenta felt before he succumbed to the darkness again was the sense of something writhing inside him, as though his own body were being coiled into the shape of the creature. The forest fell silent once more, waiting for its next victim.